Over the last few years, some shooter games came to existence that shared some interesting gameplay mechanics. While most online multiplayer shooters focus on simple, fast-paced gameplay, these games are different. The core idea of these games is online cooperation on a big scale, rather than having fun by just yourself. A single team of often 50 players working together towards a common goal. So which games am I talking about? Well, the most important ones are Hell Let Loose, Squad, Postscriptum and Rising Storm 2 Vietnam. In this video, let's take a look at what these games have in common and what makes them different. Before we get into that though, let's take a trip back to the past. Other games with similar mechanics have existed before. It's quite an interesting story how, over the years, this concept gained popularity and while not completely mainstream yet, has a strong foothold in the gaming space. So first of all, what the hell am I talking about? What defines these games? Well, the 4 titles I just mentioned all share the following similar features. All of them are online shooters with large player counts that use some kind of hierarchy. There's a commander who has the job to coordinate the entire team and can use certain abilities such as airstrike to support the team. The layer below that consists of squad leaders that take orders from the commander and who lead a squad of soldiers for the actual execution of the strategy. And the actual squad itself consists of different classes that need to work together in order to be effective. As you can imagine, these types of games work very differently from just run-and-gun shooter games. The matches are long, your patience needs to be strong, and finding enemies can be pretty hard as stealth is important to accomplish your objectives. A key element of these games is the asymmetrical gameplay with the different factions having different equipment and strategies in order to defeat each other. In these games the fun doesn't consist of constant fragging and getting your dopamine rushing, but it's just as much the anticipation and feeling that you're part of something larger. All of these games have vehicle gameplay and there's just something about having to control a tank with 3 people.
Yep. Nice. We can cut off their reinforcements to our point.
I think he's down.
He did.
The infantry combat is intense and often 1 or 2 shots are enough to kill someone. In this philosophy, winning after a long hard battle gives greater satisfaction. Or the opposite. Within the mentioned framework, these games do differ significantly. I mean, the map sizes are very different, the setting, the pace of the gameplay, team sizes, number of vehicles, you name it. Let's get into these specifics later though. First, let us move back to the past and investigate where this type of gameplay came from. For older gamers, this could be quite a nostalgia trip, and for younger gamers, an opportunity to learn a thing or two. The early 2000s were important to gaming as many popular series of today originated back then. The origin of this specific gameplay type is funny though. There were quite a few popular, realistic military-style games at the time. One such popular series was Rainbow Six, which was more of a simulation-style game at the time compared to later editions. The original came out in 1998 and gradually developed further with Rogue Spear and Blackthorn following a few years later. Rainbow Six Raven Shield that came out in 2003 and its expansion Athena's Sword were the less realistic ones before it became more arcadey for a mass audience. Another popular game was Operation Flashpoint Cold War Crisis, which came out in 2001. It was a true military simulator. This game eventually became the Arma series due to some intellectual property issues and conflict. Apart from these 2 examples, there were loads of other military-style games as well. The funny thing is, the hierarchical gameplay type didn't really originate at these types of titles. Maybe it had to do with the fact that most games at the time still focused on a single-player experience, despite having a multiplayer component. Many households didn't have broadband internet yet, and gaming in general was more of a nerd or kid hobby than a mainstream form of entertainment, like it is today. One type of game that did focus mainly on online play was the arena shooter. It was dominated by 2 different game series known as Unreal Tournament and Quake 3 Arena, which both came out in 1999. Arena shooters are pretty much the opposite of Hell Let Loose or Rising Storm 2 Vietnam. They are run and gun, extremely fast-paced shooters with pickups and short rounds in enclosed maps. Still, one of the origins of this team-based hierarchical type of gameplay can be traced back to Unreal Tournament, and especially the newer installments Unreal Tournament 2003 and 4 that came out a few years later. The gaming market not being as developed as it is now also meant it was less tightly controlled. Mod support was very common and many of these projects became standalone. Good examples of this are of course Half-Life, which came out in 1998, and Half-Life 2 in 2004, which had tremendous mod support, of which Counter-Strike might be the most famous one. And of course the World War II mod, Day of Defeat. Unreal Tournament 2003 and 2004 were also modded extensively. One of these mods was called Red Orchestra Combined Arms. As opposed to the fast-paced gameplay of the original games, this mod introduced something new. This award-winning total conversion changed the setting to World War II and focused on the Eastern Front between Germany and the Soviet Union. The gameplay mechanics were very different from most other World War II shooters at the time. There was a large focus on realism and authenticity. With a limited HUD, no crosshairs, you had to aim down your sights and the time to kill was very quick. A standalone version was released on Steam and the game gained in popularity. In 2011 a sequel was released called Red Orchestra 2 Heroes of Stalingrad. As the name implies, this game focused on the Eastern Front as well. It introduced new gameplay elements, including the commander role with special abilities such as calling in artillery and recon planes. The squad leader role could give artillery coordinates to the commander, and squad mates could spawn on this squad leader to get quicker access to the front line. In 2013, a standalone expansion for the game was released called Rising Storm, which focused on the Pacific theater of World War II with the US versus the Japanese. The asymmetrical gameplay elements were very pronounced as the US had better technology, such as semi-automatic rifles and machine guns, and the Japanese had bolt action rifles, but also mines, katanas and the ability to do a bonsai charge. Eventually, Red Orchestra 2 and Rising Storm were combined and sold as one package. In 2017, a sequel was released, Rising Storm 2 Vietnam. Even though this mod/game series was a pioneer in terms of realistic large-scale online multiplayer shooters, it wasn't the only one to which the hierarchical style can be traced back to. In 2005, another installment of a very popular game series was released, Battlefield 2. Before we get into that though, I'd like to ask you if you're enjoying the video. If you are, why not subscribe to the channel? This way you will know when I upload a new video. Anyway, Battlefield 2 was a massively popular release at the time. Many players still see this as their favorite installment in the Battlefield series. Despite not being as authentic or realistic as Red Orchestra and Rising Storm, the game did want to encourage team coordination and introduce a commander role and squad-based gameplay to the series. However, the true roots of the current hierarchical shooter is a mod developed for Battlefield 2. Project Reality is a huge mod that, as the name implies, wanted to create a realistic and authentic military gaming experience with a large focus on teamwork and coordination. Even though it was originally a mod for Battlefield 2, there were versions released for other games such as Arma 2 and 3. As I said earlier, the original Battlefield 2 had already implemented commander and squad leader roles, but Project Reality took these a few steps further. In Battlefield you could just spawn on your squad leader after you died and get right back into the action. Project Reality made it so that you could only spawn at the player-made or permanent spawn points, similarly to Squad or Hell Let Loose nowadays. The mod also introduced a logistics system with supplies and a building system for expanding your forward operating bases. It basically made it into a completely different game. And fun fact, this mod received a standalone release in 2015 and the game is actually free to play and still supported up until this day. So if you want to see where this subgenre originated, you can download it on realitymod.com. This game has been in development for 17 years, so it has loads of content. It has a staggering 70 unique maps, 27 different factions, 107 unique aircraft, 166 vehicles and 450 different weapons and items to play with. And did I mention it's free to play? In a 2018 interview, the CEO of Black Matter Studios, the developers behind Hell Let Loose, mentioned that Project Reality is the main inspiration for the game, while it also seems to have influences from Red Orchestra and even the popular strategy game series Company of Heroes. So that brings us to today. I'd argue that there are 4 games that are most popular within this subgenre, all of them catering to a different audience. There are other games that come close to it or have similar game modes, like Isonzo or Beyond the Wire, but for simplicity's sake I'll cut it down to these 4 titles as they have the purest mechanics. The first one is Hell Let Loose, that I covered extensively on my channel. This is a World War II era game that has matches of 50 versus 50 players online. Just like the mods that we have discussed, the focus is on authenticity. You will find only iron sights in this game, except for the sniper scope. More often than not, you are dead in one shot. The game sits somewhere in between full milsim realism and a bit more fast-paced action. But make no mistake, coming from a modern Call of Duty or Battlefield game, it's extremely slow-paced and hardcore. At the moment, it's my favorite hierarchy shooter. The game has many players online, so there are no problem finding a server. If you find Hell Let Loose too slow and a walking simulator, you could try out Rising Storm 2 Vietnam. It's a bit older and it has less players online, but you can still find active servers you can play on. I like that the theme is the Vietnam War, as it brings back memories from Battlefield Vietnam from the old school era. This game has smaller maps, a pace that's a lot faster than Hell Let Loose, and it's 64 players instead of 100. There are a lot of little mechanics in the game that work very well. The gun sounds are heavy, you can lean your gun on objects for extra accuracy, you can zero your guns to certain distances, the gameplay is asymmetrical, and there are controllable helicopters in the game and much more. If you enjoy a more realistic and milsim approach, check out the game Squad. This is set in the modern era and it's actually a direct sequel to Project Reality. It has loads of content, great support from the devs, and new updates are continually coming out. At the moment I'm making this video, they just released the People's Liberation Army to the game. Just like Hell Let Loose, it's also 50 versus 50 players. This game is very in-depth and the learning curve is steep. Compared to Hell Let Loose or Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, the game has an amazing number of systems. It's slower paced, even more of a walking simulator, but in return you get a very realistic and authentic game. Despite that, it's still easier to get into than, let's say, super milsim games like Arma. This game has the most players online and it's the most popular game in this subgenre. The fourth game is Postscriptum. This is made by the developers of Squad and is very similar but set in World War II. So if you enjoy a more realistic version of Hell Let Loose, check out Postscriptum. Earlier this year the user base pretty much died out, but I've heard some rumors that the player base picked up a bit again. Still, looking at the Steam statistics, there are not too many people around, so finding a good server might be an issue. This subgenre quickly grew on me and it basically made true what I wanted from Battlefield back in the past. A true cooperation between players to create immersive situations, unlike the games that are purely about fragging. Going back to other games that don't have this level of cooperation feel kind of empty, as you're just doing your thing in isolation without voice comms. I'm curious where this subgenre is going. At the moment, both Squad and Hell Let Loose have great support going from the devs and future updates will be coming out. This means it's still a very good moment to start playing these games as the player counts spike every time new content gets released. With the technology progressing, it wouldn't even be strange to think that we get even more large-scale games in the future. Because of the hierarchical structure of the teams, cooperation actually works on the scope like this. There are multiple games in early access like Beyond the Wire that also have similar mechanics. I can't wait what the future will bring for this subgenre. Anyway, I hope this gave you a good understanding of the background of these games. Thank you for watching and please like and subscribe and see you in the next one.